From my last review of episode 1 and 2 from last week, this episode continues to provide this pompous dialogue that gives off the impression of philosophical and important conversations. And yet it is easily verifiable as a shallow husk of a show and just a soulless corporate product. In this episode specifically, we get a lot of member berries, though. Hey, remember Legolas? Hey, remember Minas Tirith? Hey, remember the Argonath? Hey, remember Gandalf researching at Minas Tirith? Hey, remember Bilbo's birthday? Hey, remember Boromir's death? So yeah, even with all the member berries in this show, one of the things that I'm continually noticing is the fact that it is a bland fantasy series that feels manufactured, soulless, and lacks heart. Nothing about it really brings me back to Tolkien's Middle-earth. Not necessarily Jackson's Middle-earth, because the showrunners have tried to say that they don't want to associate themselves with the Jackson films, but then why put all these member berries in the show to say, hey, remember all this stuff from Jackson's films? It's odd. They can't make up their mind whether they want to actually associate themselves with the trilogy or not. But like I said, one of the biggest crimes this episode does, and what the whole show so far has done, is it gives off this tone that is just very generic. When I think of Tolkien, I think of his themes. I think of the mood that I should feel. I think of the themes and the tone of how he wrote and what he was trying to get across with his characters and with his stories, but I never really feel that in this show. I get plenty of member berries that make me say, oh, Tolkien might have said this, and they think that that's fan service, but I don't want that. I want the embodiment of everything that he spoke about, everything that he wrote about, and I'm just not getting that from this show. The other thing that I'm noticing in this episode specifically is that Galadriel has this way that the actress of Galadriel has this thing that she constantly cannot put on another emotion other than just resting face. And I hate to say that, but at the same time, that is what I can only accustom it to. Because we do get a moment of levity where we see her smiling and happy, and I felt for her. I started to resonate with her, but then it went right back to stoic, angry, immature, aggressive type of mentality, and it completely disassociated myself with, feeling any sort of relationship with that character anymore. And what this does is it actually shows a lot of the people in the show, especially when she goes to Numenor in this episode specifically, but people are afraid of her. In Numenor specifically, most people have almost this disdain or hatred towards her. Now, the show is playing fast and loose with Tolkien's lore, so I really don't know if this is the showrunners doing this or, telling the actors and actresses and these extras to act like this. But if anything, Galadriel should be this angelic, bright, beautiful character where she can display her compassion and wisdom and patience towards the people of Numenor as she walks through. And yet everyone has this, ugly disdain for her being there, which maybe some of these Numenorians have started to go towards the way of the Kingsmen or the King's people as opposed to the way of the faithful, which we'll get to later in the episode. There are three main storylines within this episode: Arondir's, Galadriel's, and the Harfoots. The Harfoots, for me, being one of the most boring, nonsensical, and just absolutely worthless part of the show. I don't feel anything for these characters. I have no resonance with any of these characters. I don't know why they're there. And they continually provide this disgusting, gross feeling whenever they come onto the scene. I'm just constantly wanting to take a bath while watching them. Their costume design department, whoever designed the Harfoots, is just disgusting. It's so gross. So we actually start the episode with Arondir in the Southlands. He's been captured with other elves and other humans, which automatically made me go, I had to suspend my disbelief because there's no way that these orcs would have overrun or overpowered an actual squad or army of elves. So I don't know how that happened, but here we are. Arondir is chained and he's working within this tunnel system, and again, the dialogue is nonsensical and it means nothing. We see that there's an orc that is in the sunlight and starts to begin to burn while he's outside, and he goes back under the tent that is in this big dugout hole, and the dialogue is something like, "Oh, they've been hiding from the sun. It looks like they've been digging these tunnels to hide from the sun. And, the sun must hurt them." And it's like, so it's just like, yes, thank you. You're treating your audience like idiots. Great. Thanks for telling us 3 different times that we could obviously see what's going on here. There's no reason for these tarps to be over the tunnels if it weren't for these orcs trying to hide from the sun. And shouldn't they be able to work during the night as well? So that was another question I had. But anyway, the dialogue is pretty lackluster here. So Arondir finds out that some of his friends, his elven friends, are actually at this camp, and they are digging as well as somewhat of these slaves, which again, this is plenty of an allegory for slavery and white supremacy and all this stuff, and like I look past it just to get through the episode, but you can absolutely see the allegory being put on display here of the identity politics that are included with chaining a black elf and having the white orcs, the pale orcs, enslave him, and it's too much. So with Arondir finding his friend at this camp, they start to talk and they start to try and figure out a plan of how to get out of this tunnel, maybe how to overrun the orcs. While doing so, Arondir's friend, who we saw in episode 1, the one who's smelly, I guess is what they said, he gets his throat cut by one of the orcs and dies. We feel absolutely nothing as an audience. We didn't get enough time with the character to understand him or, feel anything. So he dies. We move on to the next scene. Arondir and the other elves and humans start to try and fight against the orcs, which is when they bring out the Warg. Before that, Arondir stabs an orc with a stick? I'm sorry. What? This, to me, I couldn't suspend my belief at that point. I was like, okay, I understand that this is a fantasy series, fine. But the fact that you would stab an orc in the neck with a stick, and he, all of a sudden, oh, he's dead. Yep, that's just how that orc died. It was like, okay, the stick would obviously break before it even reached the leathery skin of an orc. Like, there's no way it would have penetrated that. So, just the types of creative decisions that these showrunners are making are completely incompetent. After the fight breaks out, like I said, they bring the Warg out, Weasel from Suicide Squad, otherwise known as, because this thing looks like a gigantic pug/chihuahua. It is disgusting. Whoever created this concept work for this CGI creature, it was an absolute mess. They should have started from scratch and completely gotten rid of this thing. I was laughing at how awfully ugly the eyes were on this thing, and like I said, it looks exactly like Weasel from the Suicide Squad. So after releasing the Warg, Arondir tries to escape, his friend tries to escape as well, gets hit by arrows, very similar to Boromir's death, unfortunately, and Arondir gets pulled back into the hole, to which they then bring him to Adar, who is the orcs' leader, and then we end that arc with a fuzzy picture of who Adar is, and we'll find out in the next episode or episodes later that it is actually another elf. So then we get to Galadriel's story. Galadriel and Halbrand are found on Elendil's ship, and instead of waking up and going to the ship deck and thanking Elendil for having them survive and saving them from the ocean, Galadriel starts immediately asking where the manager is. She starts asking him questions. Where are we? Where are you bringing us? Who are you? Why are you taking us here? And just constantly berating him with these dumb questions without even so much as a thank you for saving my goddamn life. One of the things that I noticed with some of the Numenorians on the ship was that they all looked like they'd been pulled from some college campus or like a Coachella, like live concert. They all looked like these whiny little boys. None of them actually looked like hardened seafaring men. If you've ever been on the sea, or if you've ever seen someone who's a fisherman, or someone who is like if you look at Deadliest Catch from like Discovery Channel, those men, even if they've been on the sea for only a few years, they are hardened. Their skin, their face, their structure, their bone structure, they are strong and built, and they are torn by the weather and by the atmosphere of a ship. It is not an easy job, and all of these extras just look, like I said, like a bunch of college boys. Like I couldn't find myself in that world because it took me out of there, and I just said, oh, these were all casting extras hired by some third-party company out in LA. But the ship eventually ends up going into Numenor, and we see the beautiful city portrayed by lots of CGI. I'll just say this. The CGI was fine. It looked beautiful. And honestly, I really like Numenor's look. It's very Greek. It's very Mediterranean. The statues are very reminiscent of Roman and Greek culture. So I actually really liked the look of that. It was probably my highlight of this episode, just like Khazad-dûm was my highlight of the second episode. So I will say that's a positive of this episode. But once they get to Numenor, Galadriel and Halbrand are taken to the large public setting where they are brought in front of Tarmiriel, who is the acting advisor or queen there, or queen regent, I guess I should say. And they are brought to her to ask for safe passage to Middle-earth. At least that's what Galadriel wants to do. And instead, Tarmiriel says, no, you are our prisoners now. You are not welcome on this island, and we are going to, imprison you to figure out what to do with you. I don't know why. They want them off the island, but they're going to imprison them. It doesn't make sense. Just go with it. So anyway, Halbrand says to Tarmiriel, well, why don't you give us a few days to determine what your decision actually is? Because then, if you do give us an opportunity, we'll get off this island and we'll go to Middle-earth if we can use one of your ships. So she agrees and tells them that they will be imprisoned, or they will be their guests, quote unquote, but they will be under a watchful eye while they're there in Numenor. And of course, Galadriel somehow escapes. We don't see how, but she starts walking around the Numenorian city to where she then finds Elendil. Another thing that I noticed while Galadriel was walking through the city is that she tends to hide her ears a lot with her hair. She did it on the shipwreck. She does it here in the city. This is absolutely not Tolkien whatsoever, because if it were truly Galadriel, a 6'4" elf with glowing, long, beautiful hair that shone just like the Silmarils, mind you, that's what her explanation of her characteristics were like. People would know her just by seeing her. They wouldn't have to see her pointy elf ears. So her hiding her ears with her hair does absolutely nothing. If she is the Galadriel of Tolkien's works, which we are to believe, then people would notice her just off of her depiction there. One thing that I forgot to mention about Tarmiriel is that she pronounces her lines and she gives her dialogue like she is on some community theater set. It's so pompous and entitled. There's no kind of quiet confidence. It's just sheer snarky arrogance. So anyway, like I said, Galadriel is trying to steal a boat. She escapes and tries to steal a boat and finds Elendil there, to which she then finds out that Elendil speaks her language, that of the Elvish or Old Elven language, and he tells her that there are still people on Numenor who are loyal to the elves or who are part of the faithful. And she wonders who these people are, how they know the language, and he says, well, that is from the Library of Lore or something like that. And so because of that, they end up, she asks him to take her to this Hall of Lore, and that's where we get our classic scene of Galadriel smiling in slow motion as she rides a horse across the beach, which I'm sure plenty of people have seen on YouTube or Twitter now, and they end up going to the Hall of Lore. Once Galadriel gets there, she ends up finding some scripture or some letters that resemble the mark that she found on her brother in episode 1, and she starts noticing that mark resembles, wouldn't you know it, the Southlands, or otherwise known as Mordor, and so she determines that this mark that Sauron has been placing on her brother, on the orcs, on the fortress, all these things that she's found it on, are actually, it's actually a map to the Southlands, that he will be focusing his army there, essentially. Now, while Galadriel's over in the Hall of Lore, Halbrand is eating and drinking with some of the Numenorians, and we start to see who he really is, which is actually Sauron, which, surprise, I think if you didn't know it already, there you go. Halbrand starts to kind of manipulate some of these men, and we get to see how he utilizes his charm in order to manipulate people into getting what he wants them to do, which is exactly what we would expect from Sauron. So, perfect depiction, that's what I like to see. However, we then get that totally reversed, and he has this big fight scene, brawl with these other guys. He fractures some dude's forearm, he bashes another's skull into the floor, and he says this, Sylvester Stallone 80s action hero line, and he goes, "Call me Halbrand." And I just rolled my eyes and I go, who the fuck is writing this goddamn show? So Halbrand is taken into captivity and then is put into a actual prison after, being watched and having him brawl with these other Numenorians. So then we see Arondir and his family drama, because Arondir is talking with his son and his made-up daughter, which the showrunners made up for fun. The other thing that I don't get or understand is why Arondir is talking to his son Isildur, and who is like more Mediterranean, has darker skin, more Hispanic looking, but then he's talking to his daughter, and his daughter looks like a 20-year-old college Southern California white girl, who's just like, who actually in the show goes, "Dad, I made it into college," or like engineering school or something. I guarantee you the showrunners just put her in there just to have, female empowerment for, Arondir's line of daughters and sons, which it's never a thing, but like I said, the showrunners are playing fast and loose with this show, so who knows anymore. So Arondir and his made-up daughter and Isildur kind of have this dinner and conversation. It doesn't really amount to anything. The only thing we find out is that Isildur is supposed to become part of the naval, ship academy, and he wants to defer. That's pretty much all we get from that conversation. So then we find Galadriel meeting Halbrand in the prison, and she comes to find him to let him know that she knows what crest he is holding, because he has a pouch around his neck that has a crest, and she notices that is a royal crest from the Southlands, which is what we now call Mordor. But she starts to talk to him and say, "You and I were put on this path together not because of faith, not because of destiny, but something greater than that." Now, as she's telling Halbrand this, she says it in such a way that is so boring and unappealing that I can't wrap my head around their conversation or their, chemistry together. If she is talking about something greater than fate or destiny that brought them together, that's a pretty big thing, I would think, and I would hope. But the way that she expresses the line is so monotone and stoic that it's tough to actually see that she actually has any emotion behind the line. So, for example, she's trying to be this badass, stoic, hardcore, female protagonist, but instead of giving us something more where we can actually feel for her, no one is actually able to resonate with her. So the line goes something like, she says, "It was not destiny or fate that brought us together." And it came off a little whatever, but if she said something to the effect of, "It was not just fate or destiny that brought us together. It would be, and hey, listen, I am no actor, but just something that gives me more oomph, gives me something to care for with these two characters. Whereas the other one is just bland and monotone, and I can't really understand where she's trying to come from. But she starts saying that Halbrand can reclaim this, this crest, that he can be the king of the Southlands, and that they can both shed blood together, and they can both, resemble their bloodlines or whatever, or rekindle their bloodlines. And they're trying to make him the hero of this story. Halbrand even says, "I'm not the hero that you seek." It's also in the second episode where he goes, "Looks can be deceiving." He's absolutely Sauron, and we're just not, the audience is dumb. The showrunners think that the audience is dumb and we're not going to understand it. Okay, and now we finally get to the Harfoots. This was exhausting, and I will try and make this as quickly as possible because nothing really of note happens here, but let's just get right into it. Nori's father's ankle is still broken from the previous episode, and they are wondering that if they will be left behind in this caravan, considering that the Harfoots are now going to be migrating from one location to the next so that they won't be seen or they won't be found. And one of the things that we find here is that the Harfoots are absolute fucking savages, because if you don't keep up with the caravan, you will literally be left behind. Like I said, their traditions and rituals are horrific. I don't understand them whatsoever. So once we find out that Nori's father's ankle is still kind of messed up, we don't know if he will actually be able to carry his weight with their little wagon, their home, if you will. We then see Nori trying to grab the papers from the book of Sadak Burrows, who has the kind of astrology that's on there, the constellations, so that she can study it to better understand what this stranger is trying to talk about, because we see from episode 2 that he's trying to design a constellation, or trying to tell them something with the stars. So she tries to grab some of the pages, she gets them, she gives them to the stranger, and the stranger ends up burning them and freaking out and falling to where all the Harfoots see him. Now, the reason why all the Harfoots are together is they are honoring their dead, or they're doing like some sort of celebration before the migration. This is meant to be a member berry to the, Bilbo's birthday, hey! But it's very sadistic, it's very weird. They are laughing over some of the deaths of their fellow Harfoot family members, while also crying over them. The tone is very odd and weird. I didn't understand the scene whatsoever. But basically, they were remembering all the ones who they said fuck off and left behind, and now they're remembering them. Very odd scene, but once all the Harfoots notice that the stranger is there, everyone starts to point their finger at Nori because the stranger calls her out by name. So once everyone figures out that, oh, Nori brought him here, Sadak Burrows has a decision to make. Do we leave the Nori Brandyfoot, or whatever her name is, do we leave them behind and don't take them on the journey with us, or do we allow them to come with us? He allows them to come with them because he just says Nori is young, she didn't know what she was doing, and the father ends up trying to make the trek. However, they're the last ones in the migration, and they can't make it any farther. The father is about to fall down, and we see that, look who it is, it's the stranger coming to help. And the final word that he says is, "Friend." He literally says it like that, and he starts helping push the cart so that they can keep up with the migration. Wow, okay, I think I've covered everything. This was way longer than expected, and I greatly appreciate you guys for staying. If you guys want to see more reviews like this one, where I can kind of give a summary and maybe some of my opinion in here as well, please let me know in the comment section below. Have you guys been watching this series, or do you prefer to get your information and your reviews and reactions from YouTube videos like mine? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.